ASMR. I had long hoped, when I left Iraq, that my strangest days were behind me. It would seem that after I finished this legal statement, they certainly don't lie ahead of me. I write this as a truthful account of what has transpired to me over the past months. I tell it openly and without duress, even if I'm handing ammunition to my enemy. Which, by the way, is something we did almost all the damn time I spent in Iraq. Anyway, a little perspective for you. I was 18 and just got out of high school, and lucky for me, the war was still on. I still remember the day in my junior year when they rolled the TV into the classroom, and with my teachers, classmates, and millions of people around the globe, we watched almost 3,000 Americans get killed. Unlike those around me, I quickly realized that out there, somewhere, there were people watching this and celebrating it. And I knew right then that it was my duty, my job, to go out and kill them. My graduation present was my dad driving me down to the recruitment office where I signed up for the Marines. I saw myself signing the documents as the fulfillment of my oath I made that day in high school, and also as me signing the death warrants of all those I would come to kill. I remember well all these quaint moments, but that's the problem, as I also remember all those that I killed, and in that way, it's a constant screw you to myself. I keep them alive in my head. I keep them alive day and night and day. I'm tired of telling this story. I'm tired of telling it to my dad. I'm tired of telling it to the VA's three-ring circus of clowns, doctors, and therapists. I'm tired of replaying it in my head. So I hope I tell it here, and it's for the last damn time. The too long didn't read version is that I spent a lot of time on night guard in Iraq. I lived most of my deployment drowned in the murky grain, emerald green of a night vision scope mounted to a marksman rifle, watching a leading road to my fob near Fallujah. I eventually got so good at staying awake, I couldn't really sleep. I had probably hundreds of contacts, momentary attacks or attacking the insurgents who would approach, fire off a round or two, or throw a bomb, or try to plant a bomb, or try to drive a bomb into the base. Each time I picked them off as they came, all while in my mind taking snapshots of them going down. A handful of them here, a car bomb driver here, sometimes two guys with the same bullet. But the one that really haunted me was during one of the few sustained engagements we had there. I directed a fellow Marine with a grenade launcher to fire into a group of insurgents taking cover behind their technical truck. He really couldn't see it real well, so he just fired. Poop. The grenade launcher discharged his lethal payload with a satisfying thunk, and the exact moment the round reached the target, the three insurgents emerged from behind the truck in a suicidal charge, their AK-47s up and blossoming their fiery tulips, zipping rounds into oblivion. The 40mm grenade hit the guy in the center of the three, hit his gut and detonated. A puff of smoke and a bright pink of shower of human flesh, blood, and bones from the guy's ribcage and arms tore into his fellow suicide squad. His buddies dropped, but this guy took two more steps. And I use the term guy loosely, as it was only his legs and his feet. Virtually everything else at the waist up was just gone, and yet one step, two step, left foot, right foot, before collapsing into the splits. I see the waist the most, and he scares me the most. But you don't care. You don't, they don't. What mattered to me is that I served and I came back. The daily flashbacks and anxiety and paranoia one adopts to survive as long as I fought over there, more or less under control. Waste always visits me before I fall asleep, though. He walks his 2 fateful steps through the door to my bedroom. Into my bedroom from my closet, through the walls, and through my eyelids. He's the bullet I can't dislodge from my brain, but refuses to kill me as quickly as one would hope a bullet to the brain would. He comes in unannounced. I blink and he's there. He stings and jars me like someone is stepping on my balls while choking me. In 2012, when I got back, the VA gave me sleeping pills, and they kept Waste away. But slowly, Waste came back, and I took more and more until I needed to take other sleeping pills. Then they stopped working too, and then I started drinking. Then Waste almost got his revenge. I almost finally died, at least the first time. The VA therapists had to wean me off those pills, and then tried other ways to get me to sleep. To keep Waste from jumping me up to 11, just at the point my eyes shut and I would slip out. The VA was at first sympathetic to these extraordinary symptoms, at first providing me access to research groups trying experimental drugs and techniques. One trial program even claimed that they had a drug that could erase waste from my brain. But, like all things too good to be true, the trial shut down before I was called to enter the research group. This is 2016, and there are other ways I kept waste away. I'm not proud of it, but they don't call it smack for nothing. Unfortunately, it landed me twice with a puff of naloxone up my nose, my body feeling like it was on fire. In court, my family more or less kicked me out after that. The first time I almost died from my pills and booze, my dad was scared shitless for me. Went to bat for me, stayed at my side the entire time. When it came to my heroin use, my dad was harsh, to say the least, because he was in Vietnam, and he saw lots of his fellow Marines use and get back to the States wasted. In his mind, he thought I was better than that, and I wasn't. I was a Marine too far for him. And I think he saved up all of that disdain he gathered for the dead and dying Marines using during and after the war for me when he found out. It took everything my mom had in her to convince him I was still their little boy. And he eventually gave me that second chance, and as you already know, I blew that one too. Among all of the insults that he chucked at me like so many live hand grenades, I think the one that stuck the most was that he told me that it was Marines like me that we lost Vietnam. And I think that was the moment that I knew there was never going to be love between my father and me again. Sooner or later, my dad's words would join the pantheon of ghosts haunting me to any place I'd call my bedside. I got my own place, and a few months after number 2, I got clean, and the VA had reluctantly restarted me on the original drugs they had gave me years ago because I was no longer tolerant to them. It was during one of the follow-up visits that a nurse, a 20-something, barely out of school, doing her residency there or whatever, suggested something to me out of the blue. I remember that she was short and had dark hair and a small brown mole just above her lip on the left side of her face. At first I thought she was hitting on me, but little did I know then. I resented the fact that she tried to relate to me with her own sleeping issues at the time. No one, in fact, really knows what it is that I'm going through. And by the way, if you're listening to this now, you don't either. But anyway, she offhand mentioned that I tried watching some videos on YouTube to try to get to sleep. She said the name of the type of video so fast it didn't register with me the first time, and I asked her again about them on my next visit. She called them ASMR videos. She said they made her feel calm and relaxed in the face of adversity, and they lulled her to sleep with the regularity of any other sleep aid she could prescribe. But she wasn't afraid of gaining tolerance to it or overdosing on them. She told me they weren't a substitute per se for the medication, but she was interested in whether or not the videos could help me. She also told me that they weren't well researched and that the ASMR effect wasn't entirely scientifically proven or developed, but there was enough anecdotal evidence there to suggest it. I can't say I remember what ASMR stood for then, and I don't really recall now. But without a doubt, if you type ASMR into YouTube right now, you'll find thousands upon thousands of videos of it. I ignored her advice for a few weeks until waste came back on top of my medication. I couldn't get another appointment for at least 2 weeks. Even if I could, they wouldn't up the dosage until at least 4 weeks. I didn't want to go back on the junk. So one night I took out my smartphone and pulled up YouTube and scrolled through the countless, endless numbers of ASMR videos on effort. Most of them were of fairly attractive women simulating a haircut or some other close activity to the face or the head, or tapping some material together next to a high-end microphone. I felt stupid at first for even looking at them. I felt dumb for even considering this course of action. But I remembered what the nurse said, and she asked me if I ever got a tingly feeling when I was getting a haircut as a child. The fact is, I did. And she said the videos are like that, and they stimulated that tingly feel. So, feeling that burnout, nausea sensation from not sleeping, and that wired, frayed nerve feeling from waste's haunting presence, I randomly picked a video and started to watch. I watched someone give a haircut next to a camera, so like a point of view perspective, simulating giving me a haircut. I remember being transfixed on the screen of my smartphone and zoned out by the gentle metallic clanking and sweeping of the shears together on fake hair. I was so transfixed at one point I looked up and I saw waste and that tarnished bronze buckle of the ammo belt that he wore, and I saw his bloody, disorganized innards, and I followed them down. I followed my mind looping around itself as it looped around the shredded remains of his large intestines, and I didn't squirm. I didn't scream, and my heart rate stayed the same. Before I knew it, I was asleep. I woke up the next morning as if I were Scrooge in A Christmas Story. I poked and prodded myself all over. I felt normal. I felt better than normal. I felt great. I didn't feel drugged or groggy or jacked up to 1,000,000, and I didn't feel dopey. This was a restful sensation I hadn't felt since high school. In a word, I felt miraculous. I made it. I made it with my supply of drugs and the dosage until my next VA visit. But I just barely made it. The combination of the drugs and the ASMR kept me good. In fact, a few nights I could just watch the ASMR without them. I was getting better in every possible way. I even took a second job for a bit and got ahead on my bills. But towards the end of the prescription, I was doubling down on the drugs, and waste had returned to his full frightening potential. At the time, I thought it was good fortune that I got the same nurse I had about a month ago. I told her about the ASMR videos and their result. I told her that I exhausted all the ones that I was interested in watching and the ones that were working for me. She suggested that I keep looking for new ASMR artists. Anyway, I got some more meds. I was already one dose strength away from having to double up on the new medication again, and I was desperate to avoid my previous spiral. So I went back to YouTube, searching for a prayer. It wasn't long until the unholy YouTube algorithms took their hold and started making recommendations. And that's when I was introduced to Morganus, the goddess of sleep, recommended for you, appearing at the top of my search. I vaguely remember from high school that Morpheus was the god of sleep, so I figured that this was derived from that. I pushed play with a sigh and covered myself and watched the screen from the edge of my pillow. I had learned that having earbuds in helped the stereo effects, so despite the strangulation danger, I used them. Morganus started out with a spacey, abstract, swirling galaxy sort of collage with audio befitting the intro of a 1980s space-based television show. The sound rung in my ear, and the collage was nearly nauseating. It was distracting, but it was a powerful effect that wasn't exactly delivering the tingles and calm that I had come to expect. I was about to change the video, but then I just blinked out. I blinked out because I woke up 9 hours later. It was the first night I didn't see Waste, since he was blasted to bits. I was elated that morning, the whole day in fact. I thought I was cured. I thought I would cancel my upcoming VA appointment and make room for someone more in need than I. Besides, I was able to avoid the long trip to the city by Uber, bus, then subway. I even thought about contacting my mom and dad. It was the most incredible thing to me at the time. For the first time since I felt like I won the war single-handedly. There was a bright, warming sun rising in my life, illuminating a beautiful horizon of possibilities. I tried Morganus alone without the pills. I had even better results. I was like this for at least 2 weeks. By the end of those 2 weeks, though, I had this sickly sense that maybe this was, again, all too good to be true. When I felt that way, I took the pills too, and it put me in a good place for another 2 weeks. The one video never really changed. There was only one video from the channel Morganus, the goddess of sleep. But it seemed to change ever so slightly over time. But at the time I figured it was just misremembering, as I required more of its 8-hour runtime to fall asleep blissfully. Speaking of misremembering, for a time I started to completely forget about Waste from day to day. Details like the height or the nature of the ammo belt seemed to fade away. Lots of other things during the day remained distracting at the time, but Waste, my unwelcome bedside companion, was dissolving away, along with the sounds of shells, rockets, and gunfire after my second tour. I got cocky, and I missed my appointment, and I was going on the pills as needed. And then that's when the strange things started to happen. And when I say strange, I mean more strange than insomnia induced by a walking disembodied set of legs. The first thing was really small. It was my apartment door. I always locked it. I locked it like my life depended on it, and frankly, where I could currently live, my life kind of did. One afternoon, I went to leave, and I found it unlocked. But I remembered locking it. I remember being there and turning the knob, and I don't remember leaving. I immediately snapped to go check my safe, my guns, my cash. I checked under my couch, my other stash of cash, and my other gun was still there. Everything was apparently there. I thought maybe I must have left it unlocked by accident. I thought maybe I was becoming so normal again that the regimented things I did to feel secure as if I were still in Iraq, were finally fading away. So I let it slide at first, because maybe this is what it meant to be getting better. It was a few days later, though, that night I vacuumed the carpet, and those fresh symmetrical parallel lines were all rose up throughout my entire bedroom and all of my apartment. And I went to bed. And I got out of bed the same way I got into it. And I saw the footprints, the foot imprints in the freshly vacuumed carpet. But they split. They split to the other side of the bed, between my bed and the desk. Unlike the way that I always approach my bed, between the wall and the bed. They weren't just footprints, they were boot prints, but without any treads. I panicked, and I checked all my valuables again. I breathed heavy like the first time I ever came under fire. Someone or something was in my apartment while I was asleep. So I called off work that day. I called the police. They found no signs of entry. They surveyed the surroundings, and they found nothing unusual. They even checked the CCTV footage at the gas station on the corner. The two officers danced around a bit. And fortunately for me, they weren't the ones who arrested me in the past for using. But they did know about it. And they advised me to call the VA and to keep my nose clean. And then one of them insulted me by suggesting that somehow I had sleepwalked. I shook my head once every half hour for the entire rest of that day, as if I was trying to rid myself of that cop's asinine comment about me sleepwalking. Then again, I didn't know if this was somehow a new side effect of the drug I was taking, or maybe even a side effect from the ASMR videos. So I set up a small detection trap in my apartment. Nothing fancy, just a strand of floss around the door's wall protector and the handle of the dresser nearby. I shut the door and went to sleep, as usual with the video on. The next morning, the floss was broken, but the door was shut, and nothing else seemed to be wrong. After that, it confirmed everything that I already knew, and so I went into Overwatch mode. I turned down the lights and sat in the dark for 2 weeks straight, just like I was back in Iraq. I lost both my jobs, but I didn't care. I knew someone other than myself had been in my apartment once for sure, maybe twice. I didn't see Waste during those stakeouts, but I felt like he was around. Like I said, I felt like I was on my first tour again. I didn't see anyone or anything unusual. I was just not the same, though. At the end of those 2 weeks, I was barely staying awake, and I should have just called it quits right there. I was effectively cured. The first night that I gave up on the stakeout, I watched the SMR video again. The next morning, I got up and I was waiting for my Uber to take me downtown to see if I could get one of my old jobs back at the bank. My neighbor from down the hall was also at the corner, and he mentioned in passing if I had a rough night, with a big grin on his face and a wink. I really didn't like this neighbor, but I gave him a confused look and refused from calling him something uncharitable. He must have thought I was hungover or something, because he laughed and nodded to further this expectation that there was some sort of inside joke here. I politely said I did not get his meaning. He stiffened up and slapped his hands against his side and unleashed an angry, "Come on, man!" He said there were 2 women who came into my apartment last night. He said they were biker girls or something like that because they were wearing motorcycle helmets and leather. He said when he caught sight of them, they tossed him a couple of beers and said it was a consolation prize for missing out on the party. He said he didn't see their entire faces because they wore their helmets inside. In retrospect, he commented that was weird that they entered and then left with their reflective visor on the helmet down. He said I came to the door and I opened it for them and said hi. With that, my heart racing, I canceled my Uber and stormed back to my apartment. I checked all my stuff again. It was all intact, and I didn't see any other sign of intrusion. I didn't recall getting up and opening the door for anyone. And I contemplated my neighbor was just messing around with me. But I didn't know it. I just didn't know him like that. Were there people, specifically women, dressed like biker chicks, in my apartment building or in my room? Did I in fact let them in? As much as I didn't have a second thought about banging on his door to demand more information when he came back that night, I realized it was something I had to do first. I put down a decent amount of the last of my cash on a small digital security camera and set it up to record to an SD card I took out of my phone. I hid the camera under a pile of dirty laundry at the corner of my room. I took my meds and popped on the channel that night, and I fell asleep. I woke up and seized the SD card out of the camera and popped it back into my phone. I didn't see anything the whole night, but I immediately felt dizzy and tingly watching the playback because I could hear the Morganess voice and the soundtrack in the background of the video. It had a profound effect on me, enough to drive me to sit down on my bed and shut my eyes. I had to blindly thumb for the stop button on the video. As it stopped, I was still down. I hadn't felt like this since my heroin days. This was the morning. I didn't want to go to sleep. I wasn't lying down to sleep. I wasn't voluntarily trying to sleep. This was like ASMR as a drug. I couldn't believe it, but as crazy as it sounded in my head, I started to think that I was dealing with someone experimenting with some sort of form of sonic warfare. I just couldn't escape the fact that I knew something was up. I knew that the VA was somehow involved. I wondered even if that one woman, that one nurse, was one of the women who apparently invaded my home. I went to my safe, and I went to my couch. I assembled my personal arsenal, my AR-15 and my Glock with the extended magazines. And then I sighed. And then I decided I would try one more time to capture these intruders on camera. So I set up the camera in the dirty pile of laundry again, and I went to sleep with the pills and ASMR YouTube recommended for me. As always, it was Morganess. On the fifth night, the sixth morning, I had my proof. This time I had the volume muted on playback, so I wasn't affected by the sound of the recording. I saw two persons enter my apartment at night. They were wearing what I could only describe as full motorcycle helmets, with their ears cushioned inside and their eyes protected by some sort of polarized visor. I knew then that I was dealing with some sort of cutting-edge sonic and visual weapon, and these people were investigating its effects on me. I scanned each frame and millimeter of the footage as I appeared to take my vital signs and even test my senselessness with buzzers, electroshock devices, and even what looked like to be an air horn. I couldn't believe that I just didn't spring to my feet with my handgun for any of it. After 2 hours of testing me, they left. I could only assume that this time they locked the door because it was definitely locked this time. I scrutinized every frame of the video. I was searching for any additional clues of who they were working for, what their motives might exactly be. I zoomed in on one icon one of them had on the smart pad they recorded the results on. For 2 frames before the image was scattered due to the low quality of video, I saw something. I cut the image out, I stretched it around and tried to add some things to it, and then I did a Google search for the image. I found out that I was looking at an icon for a private company that studied human stasis and had strong ties to yet another company that conducted private space flights. The Wright Flight Company. On their webpage, quite publicly, they listed the problems with manned space travel to Mars and beyond. Even at the fastest speed, it would take about 5 to 6 months to reach Mars on a relatively small and speedy spacecraft. Unless the speeds could somehow be significantly increased, this distance, this length of time for even the most prepared and disciplined candidate were probably out of reach. The first option that came to most people's minds, the page explained, was freezing. Freezing had no possibility currently of working due to several scientific pitfalls, particularly with involved of the thawing of a person. Drugs are the next best option to induce a state of unconsciousness, but they were subject to abuse and tolerance, and astronauts could not be expected to perform their duties while recovering from their effects. So research was focused on the effect of the autonomous sensory meridian response, or ASMR, for the possibility of inducing a strong enough response to keep astronauts in a form of mental and physical stasis. This stasis would be like human hibernation, slowing down our consumption of oxygen, food, and water for the journey. I stopped reading. I focused on the opening around the helmets of the two persons who invaded my apartment. I had confirmation that at least one had a mole around the left side of their face, just like the nurse who recommended the ASMR videos to me in the first place, months ago at the VA. I got my arsenal together. This time I was a bit more subtle, packing my AR into a travel bag with thousands of rounds of ammunition, and I set off for the VA. I was going to get my answers from her, and from all of them. I followed the rules. I kept cool as I placed my bag in my Uber. I checked my bag on the bus. I waited patiently, as I did hundreds of times before, nodding to my fellow brothers in arms who showed up making the same journey I did to downtown. No one asked me a question through the subway turnstile, but then it was about 5 o'clock in the morning. It was fall and it was cold. It was the first snow and it was falling around me, and I almost took a slippery step down the subway stairs from ground level. My resolve just kept me going through it. I walked into the station and stood for all of a minute. There were video ads and pop-ups all around me on the slightly curved walls of the subway station. They all went dark, and that's when I realized I had made a strategic mistake. I kept my smartphone with the SD card in it. And that's how they got me. They were keeping tabs on me with my smartphone, and they knew I was coming. And they knew exactly where I was right now. They addressed me by my name on all of the monitors and ad space. Derek Ritter. I froze and I pulled out my handgun from my coat. On all the screens, it was Morganus, joined by the nurse from the VA. They gave me their greater good spiel. They said it was for the future of human space travel. I told them this was all BS. I told them that for all intents and purposes, they had basically electronic nerve gas. They could render anyone unconscious for any reason at any time, and all they had to do was play their sound and visuals at someone, and pop, they were down. The crowd around me ran and cowered behind the benches, anywhere they felt that I couldn't shoot them. I was yelling at them. I was trying to explain to them what this was all about, what they were doing, but they didn't listen. In fact, even the fellow servicemen who were making the same trip up to the VA with me tried to talk me down, tried to disarm me, but it was a big mistake they all made. They played the video, and I pushed earplugs into my ears, and out of a sheer hunch, I put on my polarized sunglasses, and I started to wildly fire at all the screens and speakers around me. I watched the subway train enter the station, but as they entered, they seemed to accelerate off, as I couldn't reach the speakers and screens on the other side of the track without fear of wounding people inside the train. I realized that the conductor and the engineer had probably passed out from the effects of the ASMR video. I left the tunnel, and I hid my weapons. I ditched my phone after I called my Uber. I ditched the Uber, and I started walking to my dad's place. I figured that If anyone who knew me was looking for me, they must know that this would be the last place that I would go, especially as vocal as I had been about my relationship with him. I was out of breath and tired, and it was about 3 in the afternoon by the time I made it back to my old home, my old man's place. I didn't have a lot of time for sightseeing. I didn't have a super great plan for my unannounced homecoming. A lot of this blinded me. Maybe what happened next is a blessing in disguise. I showed up at the front door, and then so did 5 police cars. They popped up, their vulnerable bodies collaring behind their unarmored doors. I scanned them, as well as I scanned any other threat, knowing my AR rounds would pierce the metal between me and them, and that their body armor was too weak to save them. But I couldn't throw up enough fire to repel them all. I was surrounded. I threw up my arms and kneeled down, shedding my firearms and ammunition, magazine by magazine, upon microphone demand. They took me into custody. My dad came out as they arrested me on charges of a massacre at the subway station. They indicted me, saying that I caused the train wreck when I opened fire on a group of unarmed civilians in the subway train, killing 32 persons. All I did was shake my head, and when I looked up at him, he rubbed his hand across his neck, giving me the symbol. But he didn't cry. He just stared straight forward. He stared at me like I stared down at least a dozen funerals for my fallen comrades in arms. I knew I wasn't ever going to be let out, so my dad was right to declare me as good as dead. I caused the massacre. I killed those 34 people in total. I had the weapons, and I intended on killing countless more at the VA hospital. Everything I write here is proof of my insanity and my danger to society. Everyone needs to know that waste visits me every night. And I know that I'm getting good care here.